I'm Brad Swing. Let me start with a story about how Boston city government uses projects to tell stories. In 2002, we dedicated the first green building that was ever constructed within the 48 square miles that is Boston. It was a city-funded project, the Boston Nature Center, that was at the first urban nature center and wildlife sanctuary in the Mattapan neighborhood of Boston, an economically distressed neighborhood. This building included many green building features, but I'm going to focus on one. It was the first building that was permitted by the city where an engineer's stamp included a design that did not include a furnace or a boiler, because it was the first building in Boston to use geothermal. This building is directly related to the fact that by 2007, the city of Boston had adopted the only legal vehicle available to us, which is our zoning code. We used our zoning code to require private developers to build to a basic green building standard. Now, how did that direct line happen? Boston city government is uniquely situated to use projects to shape policy. We have the convening authority of a very strong mayor available to us. And what we were able to do was to name a task force that dug into all the lessons learned from the green building features of this first ever green building, particularly the $140,000 saved on that lack of boiler or furnace with the geothermal heat pump. And our Green Building Task Force engaged stakeholders that represented all the major areas of a real estate development: architects, engineers, real estate finance. And we were able to really dig into what was different about building green. And fundamentally, that was a citywide education process about integrating architecture with engineering and finding a way to change the business model to allow for the upfront soft costs of having that architecture and engineering work together. And so that's how we were able to use a single project to achieve the first of the nation private development green building requirements. Now, how can we use that idea of project-based policy development to tell you about how the next 10 years in Boston are going to look? The project that we're focused on right now is a pilot district energy microgrid that we are planning to build in the Boston Marine Industrial Park, which is waterfront property right across from Logan Airport and right on Boston Harbor. Now, we want to build a district energy microgrid for lots of reasons: to support Boston's climate action plan, our 25% by 2020, our 80% by 2050, greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals, the important resilience benefits that we certainly need to demonstrate, particularly on this waterfront site. We very much want to have the full suite of the technology advantages of having combined heat and power, hot and cold water loops, battery storage, and an islandable microgrid, because our climate action plan also has very aggressive resilience targets for us to start to demonstrate. Boston already has many examples of this kind of district energy microgrid in the campuses that dot our city. We have major educational and hospital campuses that already use this suite of technologies to great financial and resilience advantages. But what we're doing with this story, the story we're telling with this particular district energy microgrid project, is that we want to take the advantages that these single owner campuses have and transfer the technology into a multi-owner, multi-user setting. And so our pilot project, which is the sort of ground level of this three-dimensional chessboard that we're working on simultaneously, is to develop a multi-user microgrid. Now, we could only do this if because of our very strong partnership with the electric and natural gas utilities. For 5 or 6 years, our office has really championed innovative partnership with Eversource and National Grid. Eversource places a full-time project liaison in my office. We have championed energy efficiency outreach programs. I'm proud to say with Steve Nadel right here that twice, the only 2 times that cities have been ranked for the ACEEE ranking, that Boston is the #1 city for energy efficiency, and the reason that's cited is the strength of that partnership with the utility. And so one of the stories that I want to leave you with is that our ability to use a multi-user microgrid as kind of an aggressive way of developing policy is based on our ability, this trust-based partnership that we have with the utilities. Now, the challenge with a multi-user microgrid is that there is no business model for this kind of district energy islandable microgrid to operate outside of a single owner campus setting. So to address this, we deployed a similar stakeholder engagement process as our Green Building Task Force. We had 3 4-hour workshops that pulled together the chair and the commissioners of our Department of Public Utilities, the heads of strategy of the electric, natural gas, and steam utilities, real estate finance, real estate developers, for sessions to really dig in to explore what it would take to have the suite of contractual relationships necessary to actually build and operate a multi-user microgrid. We used Harvard Law School's Emmett Environmental Law and Policy Clinic to do a legal analysis of the statutory and regulatory framework governing a multi-user microgrid. We used the workshops to very publicly tell an important part of our story, which was that from city government's perspective, we intended to build a distribution company-owned wires model. Our legal analysis came back with what we asked for, which was this distribution company-owned wires model legal analysis. They also came back with a joint venture model, which with that aggressive grid defection opportunity was something that I stood up at these workshops and said, you know, city government really wants to take a reasonable next step. We want the electric utility to file this project with the DPU. We think this is the way to go. So we used these workshops to develop the business model. We developed a straw proposal. We had very interesting deal makers and deal breakers, tabletop exercises. And this work really allowed us to get ready for our procurement to actually build the multi-user microgrid pilot in the Marine Industrial Park. But the story we really want to tell is that this project, like the Green Building Project, is intended to shape citywide policy. And so to achieve that, we undertook the Boston Community Energy Study. Now, this study secured the services of the MIT Sustainable Design Labs that has a lot of experience with energy demand mapping. And what we did was that we connected our existing GIS planning map, our 3D planning map of the city, with the work of the MIT Sustainable Design Labs. And they connected a modeled energy use profile. We had 12 building types, like office building or multifamily housing, and 4 different building timeframes. So we had 48 different energy use models that we connected to all 85,000 structures on our map. And this resulted in the most granular energy demand map that we know of anywhere. It really allows us to understand the patterns of energy use. The hourly demand of this neighborhood here is Back Bay, and so you might be able to guess which are the really tall buildings based on this kind of rolling of a 24-hour hourly demand map here. This really allowed us to then work with MIT Lincoln Labs to develop a way to map areas in Boston where these district energy microgrid solutions are suitable based on the existing built reality of our city. And so to do that, the MIT Lincoln Labs applied a tool, a very sophisticated algorithmic tool called DERCAM, the Distributed Energy Resources Customer Adoption Model. That was the one thing I had to memorize that I was worried about. DERCAM was able to take this building level energy demand map that we had created and search out areas where building profiles made sense for district energy microgrids to be mapped. And so this resulted in this mapping exercise that you see here. The final aspect of our Boston Community Energy Study was that we then undertook a sustainable return on investment analysis of the build-out of these microgrids. We looked at every area where a district energy microgrid was suitable, and we undertook a cost optimization, sustainable return on investment analysis, and a CO2 optimization study. Now, this SROI was based on a program developed for the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act investments in Boston. So our Boston Redevelopment Authority research team had already worked on this, and they applied it to this situation. And it attempted to, in a frankly somewhat crude way, deal with some of the environmental externalities that aren't usually included in a traditional return on investment analysis. But it allowed us to really appreciate some of the trade-offs of building for cost optimization versus CO2 optimization. So the cost optimizations would focus on combined heat and power, and the CO2 optimization focused much more on the air source heat pump, just for examples. And the bottom line of this SROI analysis was that a 25-year build-out of this microgrid program would result in $1.7 billion of net benefits under the cost optimization approach and $680 million under the CO2 optimization benefits. So it's a modeled map, but it really allows us to understand the trade-offs involved in serving Boston for these various competing climate goals. For my call to action, I want to actually tell the story of the very first call to action that I received, and that was back in the green building policy development days. I worked for Mayor Tom Menino for 18 years, and he was a real champion of what we did, but he was very skeptical of the kind of language that we used. And so after one of these many events that he presided over using his convening authority to keep this policy development on track, he pulled me aside and he said, "You know, Brad, I want you to focus on this woman I just had you talk with. She lives on my street. I've been her neighbor for 30 years. She doesn't understand what you're talking about. And here's something I want you to think about hard. If you do not improve the life of this woman today, I don't want you to come to work tomorrow." And for someone who works on climate change and the international threat involved with that, finding ways to really bring what we do back to that most local of levels is what I want to leave you with. So when we did the community energy study, we were looking to find where else in the city we could map multi-user microgrids, high commercial loads. But we made the decision to also focus on the areas of the city where there were concentrations of affordable housing, where cost-optimized microgrids might really help with the cost of living crisis that we're facing in Boston. And we had the algorithm search out areas where there were concentrations of community centers and gas stations and convenience stores for the traditional emergency preparedness microgrids as well. So what I want to leave you with is a similar message that Taylor left you with, which is think about Mayor Menino's neighbor when you do your work. It has shaped the way we approach our opportunity to use these projects to shape policy. We have to build projects that serve the needs of the most vulnerable residents of our city. And if I don't do that every day, I really take to heart what Mayor Menino said to me. I don't really think I should be using city resources to be paid to come to work tomorrow. Thank you very much.